Hello, welcome to the Lately in PHP podcast. This is episode 74. And yet again, I have here with me my longtime co-host, Arthur Sausins. Hello, Arthur. How are you doing?
Hello. Doing awesome right now.
Okay, I
I'm in the
hope you
PHP
are
podcast.
enjoying this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you're enjoying the summer because over here it's winter. And so I have to wear an additional coat. It's
I
always
think
upside down.
your winter is warmer than our summer.
Yeah, our winter it's a joke. You just put a small coat. Okay. Anyway, we are here to talk about PHP, and as always, I'm going to start just giving a brief overview about what we are going to talk about for all people that want to just have a brief summary. Can you see my screen?
Yep. Everything's okay.
So that was too much.
Now it's perfect.
Okay, so we are going to start as always from the latest versions of PHP, starting PHP 5.5.38, and then PHP 5.6.24, and then PHP 7.0.9, and we will cover one vulnerability that it may be affecting your PHP applications or not, or even applications in your in other languages that is related with a way to inject a value for a proxy server to send to remote requests. And there is another article here about precisely these topics, so it gives you an idea what is this vulnerability, so you can check if your applications are vulnerable or not. Then we start talking about the usual PHP proposals. There were several proposals this past month. First, we talk about a proposal that is meant to change a bit the way you use calls, fluent calls to objects, and it's an alternative to using the return this statement. So the next call in the chain will be able to call the same object. The next proposal is about dropping SSL2 support in PHP 7.1. We'll get back to this with more details. Then there is a proposal to move some extensions without maintainers to the Packer repository. We'll talk about which are those extensions and what is expected to happen. Then there is an idea to implement auto-loading for functions using dummy namespaces. This is actually a revival of a past proposal that did not seem to be approved. So this is an alternative for that proposal. Then we have a proposal to add support for HTTP methods in the built-in PHP web server, besides GET and POST. Then there is a proposal for a feature that they call lazy statements, that you can assign variables to some code that is only evaluated when the values of those variables are accessed for the first time. Then there is a proposal to return the class name when you call the getType function instead of just the type that is object. Then there is an RFC for what is called a structured object notation, which is meant to provide an alternative way to the way that you usually create objects and call its functions using a different syntax. Then there is finally a proposal to issue a warning when you are trying to access a value that is not really an array and you request a certain index. So basically, these are the main topics that we are going to start covering right now. First, getting back to the PHP versions. As I mentioned, there were updates to PHP 5.5, 5.6, and 7.0, and the main concern, besides the usual bugs that were fixed, were on a vulnerability called HTTPoxy. I'm not sure what is the right way to pronounce this vulnerability. And about this, I have actually written an article because this affects PHP applications that call remote web services, send requests to remote servers. So how does this vulnerability work is even a bit amazing, because this vulnerability seems to be there like for many years. What happens is that, for instance, in the case of PHP, when when PHP receives a request, there are some headers that the request sends to the server, and PHP converts the values of those headers to environment variables or superglobals that have the name of the request header name changed to uppercase and having a prefix HTTP underscore. So in the case, if for some reason there is a request header named proxy, like we see here, its value is passed to PHP as an environment variable called HTTP underscore proxy. So PHP can access this variable with server HTTP proxy or get them HTTP proxy. So what was the vulnerability? Is that there are certain libraries that were actually looking at an environment variable with the same name, HTTP proxy, to an eventual global setting in the server that would define that all requests into remote servers would go through a proxy server that is assigned to an environment variable with this exact same name. So there were PHP environments that use certain libraries that would check this variable, this environment variable, to actually take that value and use it for sending requests to remote servers using a given proxy. So an attacker, what he could do is to send manually craft request with a fake proxy header, because there are no headers, request headers called proxy. But since the most languages used for web programming follow the CGI conventions, there will be this conversion between the headers and environment variables. So an attacker could send a request with the proxy header and make the PHP script handling this request, if it sends requests to remote servers, to use a HTTP proxy. So if you got me right, now you can imagine that this could be a serious vulnerability if you are using any PHP libraries that could use this variable, and all the requests could pass through a proxy server that would be from an attacker. So it could intercept all requests sent to remote servers, could steal the, for instance, in the case of OAuth requests, could steal the values of API applications, tokens, and so on. Could everything that passes through the proxy, including responses with sensitive data, the attacker could steal this information. So I wrote this article because I have a class named PHP OAuth Library API, which uses an HTTP client class that I also developed. And just to say that these classes are not vulnerable to this eventual vulnerability, because they never look at the HTTP proxy environment variable, even if it is set. But it seems there are some reasonably popular PHP libraries that use that, at least until this vulnerability was disclosed, they used to look at this environment variable. And there was at least one well-known application, which is Drupal, that was using one of those libraries. So there was a patch to update Drupal and any other libraries that were affected by this problem. One interesting thing that this problem is not specific to PHP. There were libraries in other languages that were also affected. Arthur, have you heard about this vulnerability? I think you nowadays use more Node.js, right?
Yeah. I don't think that Node.js does anything like that. Converting hidden names to some variables, especially like environment ones that are just in the request object and you access them as properties. And so I don't think Node.js would be vulnerable in that way.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine any other way to.
This is a convention defined by the CGI specification, which is very old, and most web servers follow it. So how to mitigate this problem? For instance, if you have an environment on which the customer does not even know that he is vulnerable to this vulnerability, there were the developers of several web servers have issued a new version that simply filters the the proxy request header. So they still convert the values to environment variables before they call whatever is handling the request, could be PHP or other language, but they filter the proxy headers. So this is one of the solutions. For PHP, these last versions that I mentioned before also filter the proxy request header in case it appears, because it does not make sense. It does not have a meaning. Neither in HTTP 1.1 nor HTTP 2. So, well, this is something that you should look in your environment. If you are using any libraries that use this environment variable, either you upgrade or fix your code in case it is your on one libraries. So anyway, there is this article. If you want to know more, you just read this article and it explains all you need to know in more detail. So with this, we're going to move on to the next topic, on which we are going to start to talk about several proposals for upcoming PHP versions. Let's start first with one that, I don't know, well, this is just a proposal. It is not really something that you probably find interesting.
Oh, you're back. So it was you.
Yes. For some reason, my computer just disconnected. Okay. Can you see me?
Yep. Everything is right. Okay, now.
Okay. Where was I when this stopped?
You only started, said that it might seem interesting, and boom, nothing more.
Well,
So
but
basically start with this. topic about returning self.
Okay, so let me restart talking about this so you can edit. Okay, moving on to this, to the proposals. There is one proposal for PHP 7, which would be to use in those calls to using fluent interfaces on which you call multiple functions of the same object, one after another. So the usual idea is to return this. I mean, each function would return this object. So the next function call uses that object to call the object again. So the proposal here is to replace that usual code with just this indication of self. But let me share the screen, which will probably help to understand better what is being proposed. So instead of putting a return this in the end of the function, you would declare it with this syntax, which is usually for type hinting, except that in this case it's not type hinting, it's just telling the code to return this value. I'm not sure if this is going to be useful because it will not save much code typing. But I don't know what is the value that the author of this proposal has seen on this. Arthur, what do you think? Could this be useful or just exchanging half a dozen by 6?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is jQuery. I think they were the first where I saw using such chaining method. And usually I'm against sugar syntax and such stuff, but I don't know why, but I really like chaining. So I really enjoy it in jQuery, in JavaScript. I even tried to introduce chaining in one other library framework in Lua that I was working on and stuff like that. So really like this idea, but about the proposal, I really don't see much of difference of writing return this or a colon self. So what I would prefer would be better like setting for the whole class, which would mean all class methods should return self if not return anything else. Not for each method separately, but for whole class.
Yeah, but then maybe you could have some methods that they did not return. You did not want to return self. I'm not sure. This, in terms of saving some code typing, it's not a great amount of characters that will save. But I don't know. Maybe the author had other perceived value, like, for instance, in this case, colon self would override return this value. So probably it could throw a error because of a mistake, but I don't know if people would make this kinds of mistake to see the value of this proposal. Anyway, from what I've seen, the other developers were not very enthusiastic with this proposal, so it probably will not get very far. Anyway, moving on to the next proposal that we are going to discuss. This proposal is about dropping SSL2 in PHP 7.1. As you may be aware or not, SSL2 is vulnerable. I'm not a security expert. I'm not even able to explain all the types of vulnerabilities of SSL2. Also, SSL3 is also seems to also be vulnerable. But the fact that it's vulnerable, it does not mean that dropping support to all vulnerable versions is a good idea, because there are many servers out there that are still supporting only old SSL versions. The idea is to move on to TLS, probably not even TLS 1, not 1.1, probably 1.2, but these changes need to be done gradually, because there is always lots of code out there that relies on old library versions. In this proposal here, they even mentioned that OpenSSL 1.1 doesn't support SSL2 anymore. So for PHP 7.1, the support will be dropped. I think it makes sense, because if you are going to upgrade to a newer PHP version, you are going to make at least a few tests to make sure that whatever services you are calling will still work. And if they do not work, you'll figure it why. Maybe the remote servers that you are calling also need to be upgraded. So I think in general this is a good idea. And while they are at it, dropping SSL3 may also be a good idea, but I think they are considering doing it one PHP version at a time. I don't know. Arthur, have you updated any libraries or servers to not support these old SSL versions, or maybe Node.js is too young to still have these problems?
It's actually even more complicated. We needed to support HTTP2, so we built ng-HTTP2 library, which depends on specific OpenSSL version, which also have only source code but not releases for all operating systems. So basically, we're building everything from sources right now, but yeah, but we're using basically latest libraries.
You mean you have,
and then being
yeah, you have servers like have old OpenSSL versions that do not support newer TLS versions? Is that the case?
No, it's mostly due to supporting HTTP2 without SPDE, but through other library, through ng-HTTP2, and that's why we needed the latest OpenSSL, which is not yet in releases, I think. So basically, yeah, we're not depending on existing like dependencies or libraries for Node.js, but building ourselves from sources and binding them to JS code.
Yeah, but well, in this case, they are dropping SSL support, SSL2 support.
Yeah, I think it's not the versions that we're using.
Yeah, it's just for sending requests to remote servers. So the concern is more on what the remote servers support. If you drop SSL2 and the remote servers only support SSL2, your calls to the remote servers may not work. It's more something that you probably do not control. Okay, so moving on to the next topic, we are going to comment about certain extensions that will eventually be dropped support, or at least moved to PECL because they lack of maintainers. They over in this post, Stanislav Malishev mentioned WDDX and XML RPC. This WDDX is so old, I never used it. It is from the times of Cold Fusion. Do you remember Cold Fusion?
I've heard the word.
Yes, you word it was used by the dinosaurs. And there was an extension that was added then to PHP, so it could probably deal better with sites that use Code Fusion. But I think that is all dead now. Now, XML RPC is still used by certain applications, and this is more concerning. There was actually one author, one developer that mentioned that he works for Moodle. So he is concerned that since Moodle uses the XML RPC extension, he may have, there may be problems with people that are using Moodle. So he said that he has actually found a bug in that extension of XML RPC client. So he's volunteering to maintain that extension, and I think it will be kept in PHP 7.1. So it will not be moved to Perl. Well, that's what I got from this. I think it makes sense. There are probably other PHP applications that also use XML RPC. I'm not sure if it is WordPress, but there are others certainly out there. So I don't think it would be a good idea to drop XML RPC extension for PHP 7.1 or even future versions. So moving on to the next topic, we are going to talk about, here it is, we are going to talk about one topic which is related with autoloading of global functions. There were proposals for this in the past. Specifically, there was this one that was presented by Anthony Ferrara, and he defined certain namespace PHP to represent autoloading of functions, classes, constants, and even stream handling classes, I suppose. But for that, this proposal is for last year, but for some reason it did not went through. Actually, now let me see if there were. I think there is not even a vote for this. This proposal is even older. It's from 2013, and it was proposed here, and now the discussion comes back to autoloading of functions. I think it makes sense because not everybody uses classes for everything, and there is a lot of code out there that is based on global functions. So the idea to have a way to autoload scripts that define functions is interesting. The proposal here is a bit changed. They defined the namespace underscore function to trigger the autoloading. I mean, to call the autoloader.
Interesting part is actually that, as he mentions in the text, that a common response, why not, is that you can just use a class with static methods and thus leverage the existing autoload mechanism. But the introduction of static class or abstract final class, in part with the opposite justification that you shouldn't need the class to hold static methods now that we have namespace functions. So,
Yeah. So I think this makes sense. Well, anyway, whoever uses global functions these days must have found a way around doing some auto-loading of scripts that define those functions. But it would still be nice to have a way to do auto-loading of functions. Probably
so
this does
there is no
something. Yeah.
autoloader class in PHP classes that loads functions.
Because autoloaders are meant for classes, or at least originally. So for functions, I mean global functions,
Yeah,
it
global
would,
function. That would be a problem.
yeah, there is no way to trigger this, trigger the autoloader. Of course, nowadays most people is programming with classes, but it would still be nice for people that want to use global functions to have a way to autoload the global functions. So that is the proposal. Let's move on to another topic, which is, this one is a simple one, is about adding support for arbitrary HTTP methods in the built-in web server. So PHP nowadays comes with a built-in web server, but it only supports GET and POST methods. The idea here is to enable the support to other methods and let PHP handle the requests values, like could be used stdin file to read the input. Is it stdin or, well, I'm not even sure, because I rarely need to deal with other methods than get and post. But there are ways to read the request data in case you want to access it. So the idea here is to just enable it in the built-in web server. Okay, moving on to the next proposal. This proposal is actually interesting. I've never seen this feature in any language, but I don't know all the languages. Anyway, the proposal here is to have a so-called a lazy statement that you could assign to a variable, for instance, or even a function argument. So after you assign this lazy statement, the actual value of the variable would not be assigned immediately. It would only be assigned when the variable is accessed for the first time. That's what I watch from this. And it could also, I think it could also, yes, the idea is to also pass these values to function calls. So the evaluation of the values is only done in a deferred way. It would only happen later if the value is actually accessed. This could avoid accessing certain values if they are not necessary at all.
Like a lazy loader, I think, hence the name lazy.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
about other languages, Lua actually has meta methods, which is exactly something like that, and you can do different stuff with it, up to enhancing the language. Like, so, I would really I am not using PHP much, but this feature seems kind of awesome and could open up and extending
Yeah, I
languages. So
think it could be useful. Uh, I think it could be useful in those cases that you may call a function that may use the value or not. And in this case, it could be, for instance, database access. And that access could be expensive. So if the value ends up not being used on the function, this code will never be executed, so could actually save some time by not performing certain expensive operations that are not necessary.
true. But
So
actually, the default example in Lua is to, for example, there is a class with getters like get x coordinate, get y coordinate, and if you are fed up of writing get x, get y all the time, you just create with this method which automatically returns get x value. So you're just accessing instance point dot x, and that's all. And you can even assign value to it and get value frame it. Basically, you're using property, but underneath accessing and executing methods. So it's more part to write to get the same functionality.
yeah, well, this is. I think this is only really, really useful if the actual code that would be executed is sort of expensive in terms of the time it needs to execute, or even it could call a database and so on. So if you have a certain variable that is assigned but then is not used anywhere, you could avoid just calling this code. So you then some performance. I believe that is the purpose of this proposal. So, okay, moving on to the next proposal, which is about precisely having a way for the function get type to return the class name when the type of the value being passed is an object. So this would like doing this if object, if a value is object, it would return the class. If the value is something else, it will return the type of that value. And this is just to avoid certain circumstances that, for instance, if when you have an object, you want to have the actual class of the object, so you don't have to make a second call just to get the class. So is to have a second parameter to the get type function, and if it is true, it will return the name of the class in case it is an object. If it is missing or it's false, it will return just object, the string object. So I think, well, I never have need for this, but for those that have code like this, it will be useful, and it will save some code to avoid typing this many times. So
and I think we should also mention that we actually discussed a similar proposal last time in previous podcast.
oh yes, the var info, var type. But from what I remember, those proposals were not accepted.
Yeah, but
If I'm not mistaken.
the main point is that not one, but multiple users need it. So probably there is a real need for dealing at least with this specific object type instance, issue.
Yeah, could be well, could be a solution for when you have you want to get the class name of an object just when it is an object. Okay, moving on to the next proposal. This is a bit more complicated, but let's try to understand what it is meant to propose. It's an RFC called structure object notation. It has nothing to do with JSON. But since it has object notation in the name, some people could think, oh, this is related. So the idea here is for, at least in the opinion of the author, to avoid spaghetti code. He thinks that when you define a class and you call its methods like this, it's a bit spaghetti code. So he was suggesting to instantiate objects on the fly with the following definition. So could define an object to be assigned to a variable in this instance of a class named B, which is this definition. Well, I don't know if this is really valuable, really interesting.
This is interesting, but I don't know. It's total overkill.
I don't know what is the gain of doing this and introducing new syntax to do something that we are already getting used for many years and understand well.
And
I don't even know why the guy thinks this is spaghetti code. I can
exactly.
perfectly read it.
I think the main point, at least as I got from his article, that this code is out of the scope of any class. It's in a global scope, and that is the bad part. But why it's a spaghetti code, I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. This is still a proposal, and it was not yet started voted, but I don't know if it will get much support. We'll have to wait and see. So moving on to another RFC. This one is about something that sometimes I think this is useful, which is to detect things that you may be having bugs. For instance, when you have when you access a variable as if it is an array, you put some index values, and for some reason the variable itself is not an array. What happens is that it will just return null, as in undefined value. But a null of the value of a certain array index that is not an array, it's null, does not make much sense. So the proposal here is to issue a warning. And well, this could be interesting. I just don't know if probably people will prefer that it throws an exception, because now in PHP every error is an exception. Well, whatever, being a warning or an exception is always useful, so you can detect invalid accesses to values that are not arrays, and which when it happens in your code, it's probably a bug. So
I think that the main point might be that if you use something like that, at least even with multiple then array accesses, then the error that you will have would not really tell you what's happening, or maybe I don't know just what error it would be, but maybe you would not be able to understand what exactly are doing wrong. But the warning they suggest, it specifically tells that. variable type boolean does not accept array offsets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the most valuable thing from this.
Yes, this is. I could swear that PHP already threw warnings when you attempt to access a value that is not an array, but I may be misunderstanding something here. Well, if it is not issue a warning or throw an exception, I think it should, because, well, an exception may be too drastic, as an exception may actually stop the code to work when sometimes it's not a serious bug. It's a bug, but it's not serious. Maybe you missed a check to access something that is not an array, but the rest of the code should execute. And well, I think this is interesting. At least a warning should be something that should be thrown in. That it could be useful. And well, that is something that is still being discussed. There is no actually the I think it says the poll has been closed, but I'm not sure if the poll for the proposal was ever started. So I'm not sure what is the status of this proposal. Anyway, with this, we practically end this edition of the Lately in PHP podcasts. As always, I would like to thank Arthur for coming and helping to comment on these latest developments of the PHP world. So on my behalf, that is all for now. Bye.
Bye.